Well, Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, Lord and two lords. Thank you very much for inviting me along to this distinguished group, the Global Diplomatic Forum. And I was looking at your website and I saw that you like to, quote, defy the status quo, change perspectives and think in a different way. Now, if I achieve all three of those today, I hope you don't end up hating me. But I will try and do that because I'm a Conservative member of the European Parliament for the East of England, represent Cambridge and East Anglia. But I actually believe in, yes, re-engaging with the EU, but from outside of it as an independent, self-governing nation once more. And I do believe, in your timescale, this could be done by 2020. You asked too for scenarios of what's going to happen between the UK and the EU in terms of scenarios based on the 2015 election outcome, very close now. Well, I'm a Conservative and I genuinely believe that we have a very good chance of winning the election. I'm old enough to remember the 92 election, where we ended up with Neil Kinnock ahead in the polls until the last week or the last 48 hours. And I think this is going to be a very similar result, where the polls will be right at the end, where people will say we cannot have Ed Miliband and we cannot risk the economy. I think it's about economy and leadership. It always comes down to that. I think the referendum pledge is helpful in winning back votes of UKIP. I'm a former party chairman and deputy leader of UKIP. I was a Conservative, I went there, I came back again, a bit like Churchill, you might say, but in a positive sense anyway. But the choice will be, if the Conservatives get into either a small majority government or a minority government working in a confidence and supply arrangement with UKIP, DUP, potentially, that is one scenario. If we get a referendum, then the choice will be between a renegotiated in or a negotiated out. I mean, both involve major renegotiations in my view, and that will be the choice. I also think that the referendum is likely to come forward to 2016. If you look at 2017, that you've got French and German elections in that year, earlier in that year, and you have us, Britain, as President of the EU towards the end, the 1st of July onwards in 2017. So I do think there is a strong likelihood under various pressures and the fact that I think a lot of renegotiation could be done more quickly than we think and is being done as we speak, that it could come forward to 2016. And I would actually welcome that, and I think others would, in fact. I believe actually in that referendum, despite the fact, which I fully acknowledge, that the status quo in referenda normally wins. In Scotland, the status quo won, rather last minute for my liking, but it was the status quo won. Alternative vote, the status quo won. 1975, the status quo won. So to win a referendum, from my point of view, of Brexit, of leaving the European Union, I fully acknowledge is just a tough demand. We will be offering, I'm sure we can achieve some substantial reform of our relationship with the EU and offer that to the electorate, but I don't believe that it will be enough, and I do not think the British people are going to be fooled twice. They were fooled back in '75 by what was a cynical exercise of renegotiation that never was. There was never any true attempt to renegotiate. It was all rather cynical ploy, and Wilson really just wanted to unify the Labour Party back in '75. That's the history, that was the main driving force. And I recommend Business for Britain's, and they've done an analysis of 1975 and the parallels to 2017 as Business for Britain. But I don't think that's going to happen again. The British people are very cynical about what they hear from politicians. Dare I say, I'm up against it all the time. And they are better informed than they were in '75, and they will go to social media, and there will be a very different campaign from '75. And I think a lot of the media will be on the side of out in that battle. I don't think that what Lord Hannay has described as repatriation without tears will work. I don't think, trying to sort of imply that you've got a big deal and a really good deal is going to work. I think people will see through it. And they're going to look very hard. And quite rightly, Lord Hannay has mentioned the alternatives. It's my job, as someone who wants to leave the European Union, to paint a picture, a positive picture of life outside. By the way, I should say the alternative scenario, if Labour do win, do remember that half the shadow cabinet are in favour of an in-out referendum on the EU. And that their major donor, who I know, John Mills, has called for an in-out referendum. So I think the pressure would grow should Labour win. I hope, obviously, that's not the scenario we're looking at. But if they do, then I don't think it's going to go away. There's going to be enormous pressure for a referendum. And you have a referendum lock enshrined in legislation anyway, which is more to do, you have a new treaty, you'll have to have a referendum on it anyway. But I reckon there'll be amendments to turn that into an in-out referendum. So whereas a Conservative victory will ensure a referendum, there'll be a big question mark over Labour, I still think it will not go away, and it will happen over time. Now, if I may just turn to the scenario. The Norwegians had a referendum. They were due to join the EEC in '73, as we did at the same time. They said no then. They had a referendum in '94, and it's quite interesting. I know the man who ran the No campaign, and he said, well, the yes side had the MPs, the money, and the media, but we had the people. And I think what's happening in this country now is that the people are inclined to vote out. The latest poll, just over a month ago, showed 51% in favour of leaving, 49% were staying in. As I say, I'm a realist. I think in the heat of battle, you could lose 20% of that, and in 75 the polls turned around. So it's not an easy one to win. But I do think that people are not going to buy the Europhile myths that we're going to lose 3 million jobs for leaving the EU. 3 million jobs in this country depend on trade with the EU, not on membership of the EU. I don't think they're going to buy the line that was used in Norway that we'd lose investment, because actually investment comes because of the city and a lot of the other factors, English language, telecommunications, all of that. Membership of the EU, as long as you get a good trade deal, is actually not such an essential element of foreign direct investment. And also, I believe, this argument that we're going to lose influence, I think, is a false one. I'm glad to see you all here. You obviously think Britain is worth covering as diplomats, but we are in the G8, the G20. We have a portfolio of powers, as I know you will call it. We have the city. We are leading members of the Commonwealth, with the IMF, fourth largest defence spender in the world, and the fifth largest economy. So I'm not complacent. There's too much debt, and we're facing some real problems. But I genuinely believe we could stand tall in the world, and very effectively in the world. Can I just move on then? How would we actually leave the EU? Well, Article 50 is enshrined in the Lisbon Treaty that allows a member state to actually withdraw. It's a constitutional imperative. It says they shall, the EU shall is the word, a legal word, conclude a withdrawal agreement. And I think that is going to be very significant. A WTO deal is guaranteed, by the way, because we're both members of the WTO, the EU and the UK in their own rights. That would involve tariffs. That's not such an attractive option, but that is a base option, which obviously the EU has with India. I'm on the Trade Committee, by the way. It has with India, with China, with America now, with Australia. So it's entirely conceivable, but we'd get a much better deal in trade terms. Why? Because we have a massive deficit in this country, £56 billion of goods. We buy, actually, I think the figure is 280 billion euros of goods from the EU every year. 73% of our cars registered in this country every year are built in the rest of the EU. So I think it would be madness not to do a proper trade deal without tariffs. And we employ 1 million Germans, 500,000 French, 400,000 Spanish, and 300,000 Italians just from our trade. So I think there will be a trade deal, and I think a lot of the fear factors will be dispelled. So finally, you asked about, do the Eurosceptics have a plan? Hopefully it's here. I've done a book called Time to Jump, if you're interested. It sets out an EEA light model, which is a friendly trading relationship, still very much heart of Europe, as Switzerland and Norway are at the heart of Europe. It takes the EEA agreement that Norway has and Iceland has, which automatically gives us back power over fishing, farming, trade, the city, financial services, foreign affairs and defence, justice and home affairs. There's a lot of powers there that Norway has that we don't have. And it's not true to say that all their laws are controlled by the EU. It's only 10%. If you look at the figures on the internet, official from the Norwegian Parliament, only 10% of their laws actually are dictated by the EU on average. So my feeling is we take the EEA agreement and we change it in two respects. One is we introduce a quota regime, and Switzerland has to do this because they've just, they had a referendum on mass immigration or against mass immigration. So we need immigration control because that is very much a live political issue. It's the number one issue now in this country, whether we like it or not. A quota control is necessary, not for every country, I would say, but those, I think, with GDP of less than 75% of the UK's. And secondly, we'd leave the EU single market. That sounds incredibly dramatic, leave the EU single market, recreate the UK single market. Well, only 8% of the UK economy depends on trade with the EU, and 5% of businesses. So we could influence the 8% of the UK economy through arrangements with the EU, but we'd actually leave. You want me to round up? Okay, finally then. I have no fear that we can have a better and a freer, more prosperous Britain outside the EU. I would point to the fact, you're here obviously as diplomats, many of you, but we've cut the Foreign Office by 250 diplomats. At the same time, the External Action Service is active in 140 missions around the world. And it's not representing us truly, it's representing the wonders of the EU, the Eurozone, how wonderful the Euro is, or how wonderful the CAP is to the world. I think it's getting in the way, and we're losing influence. Our seat on the UN, the permanent seat on the UN, is at risk, and all sorts of bodies like the World Health Organization. The EU now speaks for Britain, and that shouldn't be the case. So finally, ladies and gentlemen, I think, I do offer what I call a positive vision. I think it is a better model of life outside. We've got to have a proper debate on the facts and the benefits and the costs of doing so. But I do hope that I've actually, in the words of the Global Diplomatic Forum, that I've defied the status quo. Thank you very much.